Joseph Lennon, I'd like to welcome you tonight for a lecture from the Director of the National Theatre of Ireland, the Abbey Theatre, Senator Fia McAneil. I would also like to welcome Una Desire, the Director of Public Affairs and Development. And just as a token of our appreciation, I got them both, Joyce Harden, with her help, some Villanova sweatshirts. Thank you all for coming. Thank you guys for being here. It's so wonderful for me to have this program blossoming and growing, and with all of the support that we get at Villanova and at the Abbey Theatre. This is something that everybody that I've met wants this program to happen, wants us to build our relationship, this exchange program. There are brochures and other things outside about the summer studio, as well as about other Irish studies programs. Please take one if you're interested. Talk with me. For 3 summers, we have had students do one-day workshops at the Abbey in the summer. We've had interns for many years going and working in the archives. And for the past 2 summers, we've had a professional internship. Lauren Fanslau is here. Hallie Martinson's in class at the moment. Track her out. But have been there and as a paid intern to work during the summer. It's been an incredibly rewarding experience for our students, but I think also it's been beneficial and powerful for the Abbey. Now we're preparing to launch the Summer Studio, a 3-week immersive program in Dublin. The early application deadline is December 1st, just as a side note. We want to deepen our relationship with the Abbey with the goal of, as Father Peter said, bringing over the Abbey to Villanova with the Performing Arts Center. And if we could, while Father Peter's in the room, just give Father Peter a round for all the work he does. But this is hard stuff. This is the second Abbey lecture that we've had. You may remember Patrick Mason was here 2 years ago to deliver our first lecture, and now Fia is here to deliver our second. As everyone in this room knows, we have historic ties to Ireland. We host the oldest running Irish Studies program. We were founded by Irish Augustinians in 1842. And we've had many great runners here. We also have Marcus O'Sullivan, our head track coach, who's here tonight. And we have new Irish runners coming every year. I would also like to point out that in September, President Peter O'Donoghue led a delegation of Villanova's staff and alum to meet the President of Ireland and to meet the Prime Minister on the Taoiseach of Ireland, as well as having a full day of meetings at the Abbey Theatre. Also, Tony Ponturo, an alum, came along with us, and we had an incredible trip. We hope that this is the beginning, right, of a great, continuing relationship with the Abbey. I'd like to also acknowledge Anna McGillicuddy, who is here from the Deputy Consul. She's Deputy Consul. Deputy Head of Mission at the Consulate General of Ireland in New York. And I'd like to ask her to come up and say just a couple of words of welcome.
Thanks, Jason. Father Peter, distinguished guests of the court today. I have to say, like many Irish, the name Villanova has long been familiar to me. And I feel like I know something of this wonderful place for a long time. It's a sort of a mythical place for me, and for a lot of Irish, a place of collaboration and transformation. The Irish athletes have come and then got to excel on the world stage. So for me anyway, Villanova and world class have been synonymous for a long time. So I'm delighted to be here for that reason. I'm also delighted to visit. This is my first visit, and it will be the first of many. And to acknowledge your very special Irish heritage and your Irish Augustinian founders. And true to that heritage, I know you've been introducing to students to all aspects of Irish culture, literature, political science, history, theatre, for over 35 years, which is an extraordinary achievement. And through their studies, and I think in particular your partnership with universities in Ireland, including NUIG and UCD, I think your students have forged and are forging really strong and important intellectual links to Ireland, but also emotional links to Ireland. You have a most extraordinary roll call of honour on your website in terms of Irish writers and scholars who have been here over the years and part of your community for short and longer periods. And I know that continues with your writing residents. And in my career, and I've been posted in London and Vienna, and now in New York, with responsibility for this region, I've been so conscious of the value of Irish studies. In opening the best of Ireland to the world and in making new friends for Ireland. President Higgins, who you met on your trip to Dublin, also spoke a number of years ago about the importance of the detailed study of Irish abroad in terms of renewing and reinventing Ireland after a difficult period in the country and recent challenges. I want to say tonight that having Villanova students as part of the Global Irish family is an extraordinary gift. And I want to thank you, Father Peter, Dr. Joseph Lennon, and all involved in the Irish Studies Department for that gift, and the Irish Government values it immensely. Villanova is a vital link in the strong US-Ireland relationship. The role of Irish America, as you all know, has long been so important for Ireland, and not least in continuing support of the peace process in Northern Ireland. Only this week, former Senator Gary Hart, Secretary of State, carries envoys in Northern Ireland facilitating talks. It's so important, and it's again deeply appreciated. And of course, if we look back, Irish America had a central part in the establishment of an independent Irish state, and a central part in securing international recognition for Ireland. Some people know that we've begun an important decade of commemorations in Ireland, and we would very much like to work with you here at Villanova as we plan commemorations of 1916, 2016 here in the US. Tonight is a very special evening. I very much look forward to hearing from Senator McNeill, one of Ireland's foremost cultural thinkers, actors. And you all know, I don't just tell you, the Abbey Theatre is a national institution which has helped over a century in Ireland to give meaning, texture to the events of our lives, has provided space for critical thinking and probing, and reflection on all that is profound. As an Irish diplomat, I'm immensely proud of the Abbey, and the Abbey won me over early, giving me $7 tickets as student in Trinity to I commend and congratulate Villanova on your partnership with the Abbey. I think it's extraordinarily exciting. I came tonight and was shown the site over the hill for the state-of-the-art performance centre. I think it's absolutely extraordinary, and I look forward to seeing the partnership flourishing over the coming years and visiting that centre in due course. To finish, thank you so much for the invitation this evening. I know there's been some collaboration between the consulate and Villanova in the last number of years, and I'm new here and I very much want to continue that collaboration. I wish you every success here at Villanova.
Excuse me, iTunes needs your attention.
I think that's my cue to go on stage. Well, I was thinking, coming down on the train, of the partnership between the Abbey and Villanova, and I was thinking of the lovely George Bernard Shaw quote, and he said, "Do not follow where the path may lead, go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." And I think in your partnership, they're very much forging a new trail, a new path, and I look forward to seeing the fruit of that collaboration. Cogortis le Galer, agus Gwyn Gachra, for Sapelki Gerving Monaco.
And thank you for those kind words. And I thank you for coming down. I just want to thank a few people, an event like this, and the Abbey program, the Abbey Exchange program, requires many people to put their shoulders to the wheel. So everyone from Father Peter, Mike O'Neill, Dan Rogowski, Christine Pallas, the graduate school, Adele Lindenmeyer, our interim dean, Evan Radcliffe, the chair of the English department, Amy Lehman and George Call, everybody who is helping make this program a success. Of course, I need to acknowledge the people who are doing a lot of the legwork also. Joyce Martin in the back, the person who's seamlessly helping, and Ashley Lehman. And lastly, of course, I want to thank Father David Cregan, who is really responsible for getting this vision going. He has the passion and the mind of a theater practitioner, which is not exactly what I have, and it's very good. I'd like to say a few words about Fiat and then get off the stage myself. Fiat took over, he's been a leader in the arts world since before he took over the reins of the Abbey Theater. He's been the director and the CEO of the Abbey Theater since May 2005 and is responsible for its artistic programming and its strategic management. He's produced over 100 productions at the Abbey, including plays by Brian Friel, Tom Murphy, Sebastian Barry, Marina Carr, both of whom were Humboldt chairs here. Fiat was the arts advisor to the Minister for the Arts, Sports and Tourism. He has worked on many cultural projects and festivals on behalf of the state, including Ireland's presidency of the EU, the Centre Culturel Irlandais in Paris, the Expo, Venice and Sao Paulo, biennials for visual arts. He was the artistic director of the Project Arts Center and is a grad of Trinity College. I'm going to leave it at there and ask you to give a big round of applause if you can.
It's more an unordinary from the bench up. My own brother at some squeal, a tall Herbert, it was Villanova, I guess I'm the master, squeal, a stuff, a tall, Goliath, a smur, either a tear shot, I guess, tear shine, they could buy it. So my own brother, especially, it's brilliant and show, I guess, my job. Follow me small free outside Villanova. I just want to say how proud I am that we are launching the Abbey Summer Studio, and this is a combination of, this is an unusual partnership because we're taking our time. This is going back over 4 or 5 years, and it's really inspired by Father David and Joseph Lennon in terms of just an engagement that is deep, profound, and slow in the right way, because we want to make sure this is a profound engagement and one that's sustained, one that actually is long lasting, that will survive beyond us. And I'm very, very proud of this, and I want to thank both Father David and Joseph for your tenacity and your support over many years. I also want to thank my co-collaborator, Father Peter, an extraordinary man, a visionary, and we want to open the new Performing Arts Centre. We want the Abbey Theatre to be here in 2017. I didn't find a play for you to be in, okay? I won't mention anything. I won't mention York, okay? I promise I won't mention York. But also welcome Deputy Consul General Anna McKillicuddy as well. Thank you for your kind words as well. And may you enjoy your tenure here as well in this region. Also, we've had a great day today meeting all faculties, and particularly Dean Lindenmeyer as well. So thank you so much for your support and your encouragement. Tony Pontura, who we've met and had built a relationship with, has been back and forth from Ireland to New York, and he's a great supporter of this partnership. And Christine Pallas as well, who has really supported us as well in developing the studio, the summer studio as well. So I promised Father Peter that I'd be only about 4 hours, okay? And we stick to 4 hours, so we can think about it. What I do is I speak. There's a lot of slides I might even talk about, so I speak for about 20-25 minutes. I'll make some general comments about the history of the Abbey, and make some comments about interview some writers, particularly young new writers that are on the scene, what kind of areas they've been dealing with. So you get a flavour of both the history of the Abbey and also what contemporary artists are about. And then I'm open to all kinds of questions, tough questions, curveball questions, except from Father Peter. I'll take it. I'm happy to answer any questions. So I'm trying to just kind of mix and match the presentation. I suppose what reminds me of the Abbey and what the Abbey's done is that it was founded by artists. It was founded by playwrights, extraordinary playwrights. There was also, and this is one of them, the last director of the Abbey Theatre was also a senator. Now, I'm no poet and I'm no playwright, but both are senators. Both it's an acknowledgement really of the role of the Abbey Theatre in Irish history. Lady Gregg was a co-conspirator between them. They founded in 1897 in Cool Park. They came up with this manifesto, a part of it which is our desire to bring upon the stage the deeper thoughts and emotions of Ireland. And that's what we do. And in 2006 we came up with a slightly more contemporarized version of the same thing, to engage and reflect Irish society. And the Abbey Theatre is not a museum in the sense that it's not about necessarily looking at the past. It's about engaging and reflecting Irish society. It's about what we do now. How can the arts, and how can theatre, and how can playwrights try and make sense for us? Try and somehow, in this crazy world of ours, try and make sense for us. Sometimes artists do that in the most strangest way. They make us laugh, they make us, they shock us, they try and encourage us, and sometimes they don't necessarily understand themselves what they're writing. And that's important because that's what artists do. They try and open a window for us to get to understand what is happening. And it's my privilege over the last 10 years to be able to hear some of what those artists are. And particularly around the north, the issue around the north at the moment, the conflict at the moment in terms of the kind of dangerous sectarianism that's occurring in the post-peace process. Artists are saying a lot that we must listen to. But without these two guys, the Abbey Theatre would not be the Abbey Theatres today, because we hear about the Abbey as a writer's theatre, but it's also an actor's theatre. And the Fay brothers, Frank and Willie Fay, who were extraordinary actors at the time and who performed in all of Yeats's original plays, without those two, one was a voice coach, a voice acting teacher, the other was an electrician. Without them, the kind of understanding of the Abbey is slightly skewed, because we never hear about them as much as incidentally, these portraits of Lady Gregory, Yeats and the Fays are hanging in our foyer at the Abbey Theatre. They were commissioned for the opening of the Abbey Theatre almost 110 years ago. I love this. This is the old green room of the Abbey Theatre. Green rooms is really where all the work gets done. It's like the staff canteen, and if I want to know what's happening in the Abbey, I spend some time in our green room. This is green that got burned in 1951 after the fire, but it's still a lovely shot of great actors waiting for them on stage. So on the 27th of December this year, we celebrate the 110th anniversary of the Abbey Theatre. The Abbey Theatre was founded 110 years ago, and it was founded before the foundation of our state, before 1916. This is an original poster which has been digitised as part of our partnership with the University of Galway, University of Galway, and it's part of a very, very rich source of material we have that we're open to scholars, and we're open to scholars and students of Villanova as well. An opportunity to look back and unearth a lot of material that gets to understand the Abbey Theatre. So we opened it on Tuesday, the 27th of December, with two programs, and this is a copy of the original program. And there's two different programs and two different nights. So While It's Grand and Spread the News the first night, and then Shadow again, and Happy Home on the second night. So it was done in red. So that happened 10 years ago. So it's extraordinary for us, a great kind of sense of pride that we've survived through many wars and through many austerity and through many recessions, and still here today. 1911. So some people ask us, why Villanova? Now, why does the Abbey Theatre want this connection? Well, it goes back to the relationship that Ireland has with the US. and the link, the emotional link, the cultural link, the economic link. And in 1911, W.E.H. realised that without the support of the US, the Abbey wouldn't survive. All right? And he did what Father Peter's doing. He went fundraising. And he schlepped across many estates. He did lecture tours. I think Father Peter can't compete with Yates in terms of his ability to draw and raise money. But one of the things that W.B.H. did was he said, look, let's go on tour. And let's bring the Abbey on tour. And 1911 was the first tour to America. So the Abbey's been touring to the US for more than 100 years. We opened our tour in Boston in 1911, in September 1911, the whole series program. And this is a whole list of the first tour. Look at all those venues. We took 8 plays with us on tour. And there's all of this. I know that Champaign, Illinois there, but you can see all the venues. And we came to Philadelphia in January 1912. And that's a program we have, which we've also digitized as part of our archive program. And it's a great honour for us. We won't get into what happened, but as you probably know, the Abbey company got arrested. And they went to jail. And the famous Irish-American lawyer John Quinn took them out. There was the whole issue around the play by the Western world. I won't go into detail, but McGarry was involved. Fascinating story. I love this because as part of the programme, you see the Humpy Yates electric coach. So I don't know if Yates himself had any action in that. That was part of it, in that programme. So, proclamation, 1916, famous proclamation. For me, one of the reasons I took the job at the Abbey Theatre, one of the reasons that I felt compelled to continue to work at the Abbey is the important political responsibility the Abbey has to engage and affect our society. We're not just about creating new plays, we're not about creating entertainment, but we're about trying again to make sense of the world. And of course, 1916 occurred, the proclamation was announced on Easter Monday. That night, the play Stancil of Death was meant to be performed on Easter Monday night, the night of the reading of the proclamation, the night the rebels took over GPO. But of course we had to cancel that performance, and the poor writer, that play has never been produced since. We've acknowledged, and it's a sense of pride for us, there's a plaque, and if any of you visited the Abbey Theatre, there's a plaque right inside the foyer of the Abbey Theatre with all the members of the company at the time who fought in 1916, who participated in 1916. So you can't help, not that history should be a burden, it's not, but you can't help but realise that the Abbey Theatre, took part in an important part of the history. There's a whole bunch of names there. Sean Connolly who was at the top there, was an actor, an Abbey actor, who was meant to be in Stancil of Death, and he was the first person to be shot dead in the uprising. He happened to be an Abbey actor. Now, there were a few jokes around that. But you see Arthur Shields there, who's Barry Fitzgerald's brother, who went to Hollywood later and came back. Talon Carney, who wrote our national anthem. And Helena Maloney, very famous feminist, story person who worked closely with Jim Larkin. So that plaque is outside, it's inside the foyer of the Abbey Theatre when you come and visit us. And that's a photograph of Sean Connolly, the actor, the first person to be shot. I like this photograph because this is a photograph at the end of our street, in Middle Abbey Street. And if a photo park, you can see the GPO. That's how close the Abbey Theatre was to the site of the revolution. For a long part of we have some images of this in the archive. They used to put an ad in the programme in the late 1990s and early 20s. Particularly when we were doing a play, we were doing The Shadow of Goodman and Plough, so it would be the mid-20s, an ad in the programme saying, the gunshots you hear are not real. Because people would hear gunshots. So again, when you come and visit the archive, you see fascinating examples of how society and how the world was then through the programming material that we have. So that's a kind of brief history. What I want to do now is talk about the writers that we have and the kind of family kind of history, the family tree of major Irish writers. I came in 2005, and a lot of we have to do a lot of re-engagement with writers. But it's also, we're going through a particularly challenging time at the Abbey because, or not at the Abbey, but the Irish Theatre, because some of our stalwarts, the main major writers, are all getting old and are not writing the same amount of plays they are. And what has happened is there was a big gap between those writers and the younger writers. So part of our legacy at the Abbey was to try to keep in touch with the older, more established, well-known writers, while also encouraging the younger writers. And of course, if you, the parallel of that is sport. Whether you're doing have a football team where you just take care of the first team and not bother about the youth team, and eventually the youth team is not there anymore. And so that's essentially what I inherited, where it took us 5-6 years. And I'll go very quickly through various different strategies with you, how we try to keep the show on the road, keep the plays being produced by our established writers, while trying to encourage the younger writers, and particularly women writers. And I suppose we're seeing the fruits of that in the last couple of years. So, and forgive me, I know this is being recorded, so if I've missed out a writer, so I'm dicing with death here, but if I'm missing out on writers, please forgive me, writers, whoever's watching this. But I'll give you an example. So this is the generation shift. These are the major giants, the titans that are around the middle end of the 20th century. Brian Friel, Thomas Kilroy, Bernard Farrell, Tom Murphy, Hugh Leonard, and Tom McIntyre. All extraordinary, different energies. These were nation builders in terms of playwrights. These were the people who were writing major plays, both and interrogating the nation, interrogating the psychology of the nation. All of them are still writing for Hugh Leonard passed away a couple of years ago, and Thomas Kilroy is celebrating his 80th birthday. Bernard Farrell is celebrating his, I think, 70th birthday. Brian Friel is celebrating his 85th birthday. Tom Murphy is celebrating his 80th birthday, and Tom McIntyre is celebrating his 82nd birthday. So they're all in the 70s and the 80s, and they're strong. Most of them are alive, and some of them are still writing. Photograph of our dear departed Shane Seeney and Brian Friel, and nobody who played at the Abbey. I just put that in there because they're both colleagues and friends, of course, dear friends they were, and Shane's a great loss to us. Brian beside Tom Murphy. Tom wrote a play for us, The Last Days of an Retired in 2009. And he wrote this play essentially about greed and property. And he wrote it based on a very famous Russian novel called The Golovyovs. But he wrote it essentially about the sense of greed, about how certain people, ignore family, ignore community loyalty, and it's an extraordinary play. And in a way, that's what I was talking about. Sometimes you have to hear what the writers are saying to try and understand maybe what they're trying to understand, which is unpacking a particular society. Now, I'm not saying that Tom Murphy wrote it with that in mind, because as I'll show you, sometimes writers, when they write something, and when they talk to us about something, there's a subconscious going underneath that they might not necessarily know until they go into rehearsals themselves. Tom Kilroy wrote a play in 2010 based on Wittgenstein's Spring Awakening from Christ Delivers. Extraordinary play. Tom Kilroy is an extraordinary writer really, who is probably one of our most European writers. And he wrote a play at a time, and as we come closer to 2016, one of the challenges we have is to be honest with ourselves, as to have the dreams and ideals of 1916 being achieved. What did we mean by a republic? What did those extraordinary cultural figures who signed the proclamation meant by the republic and meant by equality? And have we achieved that? So part of the challenge for 2016 is to be truthful and to actually be honest with ourselves about what we need to do. We're still a very young nation. We will be 100 years. But I think somebody like Thomas Kilroy did interrogate that, and did interrogate the kind of oppressiveness around sexuality, particularly, and how sexuality with young people was sometimes controlled, over-controlled, and that also led to, of course, things like suicide and male suicide. And a lot of writers dealt with are dealing with male suicide in their work, young people's suicide, and it is a phenomenon that's very prevalent in Ireland, but it's being reported on more, which is good. In other words, but it needs to do more, a lot more, as we know. But certainly our writers are kind of looking at that area. So these are the shots from Christ Delivers. first time I think that hurling was ever played on the Abbey stage. that was also in the play. Thomas Kilroy was born in Calvin, County Kilkenny. It's a great hurler. But we had a hurling which was choreographed by Colin Dunn, who was one of our leading dancers and leading choreographers in Ireland. It was, of course, a leading knight in river dance as well. The next generation down is Frank McGuinness, Sebastian Barry, and Billy Roach. Sebastian Barry, of course, had a residency here in the Highwood Chair. Billy Roach is a extraordinary writer from Wexford, beautiful, beautiful writer. And Frank McGuinness, who I think is a titan of Irish theatre. He's turning 60 this year. Extraordinary writer. I have great privilege of having worked with him on many, many new plays. But he wrote an extraordinary play called There Come Gypsy Riding, again about young a young man dying and the repercussions. But he's looked at family, the idea of family as a kind of image of Ireland and how families change. So I'm going to just, and this is an image from that, but I'm just going to, this is also Sebastian Barry, the image of Sebastian's, Tales of Ballycumber, which again referred to suicide and young men's suicide. So again, without being, I don't want you to be so didactic about it or literal, but just I'm trying to pick up themes of various different writers and what they're talking about. Of course the plays are about other things, and of course the plays are more beautiful than that, but I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of what writers are looking at. So what I will do now is just show you a quick video of Frank. Now the reason I'm showing you this is Frank McGuinness, one of the things about writing a play is it's about one thing and it's also about another thing. The subconscious, the themes. And one of the things that writers do realise as they go into rehearsals is that actually when they see the play in rehearsals, when they see the actors performing in rehearsals, they realise the play is about something else. And this is what Frank's mentioned.
Well, it's a play about a family. All plays are effectively about a family. But what I hope I've concentrated on and clarified to some extent is the way that inside every family there is a constant process of change. And change, even when most settled people, is always shocking, terribly shocking. How do you cope with it? How do you register that nothing is ever quite what it seems and nothing can ever be what it was? There's enormous grief in that, there's enormous release in it as well. And I think that's what I'm finding on the way through the rehearsal, this series of shocks coming at me from the play, where what I thought I knew, like the people in the play, what I thought I knew is much more mysterious than is obvious. So I think that it's not facetiousness that makes me say I'm not sure exactly what's happening. It's much more a recognition that that's what I've actually written. That uncertainty, that lack of knowing, and the necessity to stand together to deal with that, and so far as love can let you deal with it. That's what I hope I've done. Who knows?
So I think Frank encapsulates the process of making theatre, the process of making art, the uncertainty, the discovery, that actually even creating art is not a technical thing. Yes, you have to have the technical skills, but just like any other skill, whether sports or anything else, there is something that you have to. The unknown, the uncertainty is something that I think Frank revels in. So I'm going to get back to my. Good. So the next generation is what I call the emerging leaders. And when I took over in 2006, some of these had already established relationships with other theatres. So I'm acknowledging that some of these writers have done really well outside of the Abbey Theatre and have done fantastic, have done us proud, particularly Enda Walsh and Conor McPherson, who have, and both of them are friends of mine, and both of them have an extraordinary career. But these are the generation who are roughly in their mid-40s. Marina Carr Mark Strawley, again, she was a humble chair here at Villanova, and has written quite a lot of plays, and the Abbey Theatre has, I think, produced something like 11 or 12 more plays. Don McPherson, Mark O'Rourke has just had a play recently, and Mark had a play called Terminus here in Philadelphia in 2000. Tell me. 2009, yeah. And he's had just a big hit on his hands, only in the recent Dublin Theatre Festival called Our Few and Evil Days with Kieran Hines and Sinead Cusack. I might show something shortly on that. Michael West, another writer, and Owen McCaffrey, who's a Belfast writer, and I'll mention him shortly. So there's an image from Terminus, Mark O'Rourke's play. Again, formally, I suppose, of all the writers, he is very interested in form and structure and storytelling, and of course the supernatural and the extreme. And he's an extraordinarily poetic writer. And Terminus was done in verse. It was written in verse, but in 3 interlocking monologues. It premiered at the Abbey in 2007. We've seen all over America, all over Australia, London, Edinburgh, and he hadn't written another play until this year, which is Our Few and Evil Days by Mark O'Rourke. With Sinead Cusack, Tom Honnall, Kieran Hines, and a few others. And again, it was a formally completely different play. I just want to show you a small video of what he means by this. There we go. Anyway, this play and what Mark has done is that he's a more mature writer, and the same in the Walsh is a more mature writer. They all have families now, they're married, they have children. Same with Amelia Carr. What you discover in a lot of places, the children are appearing with parents, you know. So there's still a thesis to be written around, and I won't spoil it for you in case you see it, but Ballyturk will be probably coming to America, as indeed Our Few and Evil Days will. That there's a presence of a child in these plays. And these are, as parents and as artists, they're looking at how a child has makes an impact in terms of their work. The next slide is a play called Conservatory by Michael West. Again, an established writer, and he's written about aging, the aging process, in the same way that Frankie Guinness in the Hanging Gardens, but also it's about a couple who have to deal with suicide as well. Suicide of one of their sons. So again, there's several themes running across a lot of the work. Of course, it's running across our society as well. So that's something that when we look at what the Abbey does on a political level, sometimes it's on a social level too, that issues and themes. Now, I don't set out to write those, to program those plays. Okay, I don't set out, I'm going to put on a play with this, that, the other. I have to be led by the writer. I have to be led by the playwright. I support that. But I'm not the person who's going to say, please write me a play for X, Y, and Z. So here's very quickly the kind of support we give our writers. So at the Abbey, as most of you might know, we get funded by the taxpayer, and we get funded to do significant amount of work that other theatre companies cannot do or maybe don't do. We're the only full-time literary department in the country, a staff of 3, and our job is to develop and support our writers in all kinds of ways. And some of them we work at commissioning. Sometimes we do short play commissions. So an emerging writer, we might give them a short play to commission, bring them along slowly so that they develop their skills. Obviously we give major commissions as well. That's how writers work. Literally workshops where we literally sit down with the writers, give them time and space that they can work with actors in the studio and in the laboratory situations where they actually can present their work. Script submissions. We read over 200 scripts a year from the public. If a writer is either living in Ireland or is Irish or both, we will read that play. And that is a part of our job as a National Theatre. And we read it, we give feedback to the writer. If the play is good or if the writer is good, we will encourage them, and often they will go on to the New Playwrights Programme. The New Playwrights Programme is an 18-month cycle of programme where we put 5 or 6 writers on it We give them workshops, seminars. They meet with other writers. They come to a dress rehearsal at the Abbey. They come to a preview. They come to the opening. They engage with us in a way that hopefully supports their development as artists. And we've had over, I think, 24 young playwrights on the New Players program over the last 5-6 years. And this year we've produced one of those plays by Sean Dunn to talk about in a minute. And then the Playwrights Hub, which is a program where we've gone to Belfast, to Limerick, and we go to other cities to work with writers in those cities and those scratch as well. So we had Sam Shepherd in 2009 working with our playwrights. He came over to Ireland, we produced a couple of his plays. But there he is, talking, engaging with the writers, giving them feedback, and they can ask all the kind of questions as well. There's Tom Murphy, a similar type of workshop. Fiona Shaw, working with our playwrights as well. This is a playwright hub where during the Fringe Festival in September, we open up every morning where writers can come and talk to the literary department, we work with a writer to get feedback. Now, indeed, if they wanted just to write in that morning and know for once in their lives that it wasn't a solitary occupation. The man on the far left there is Owen McCafferty. I'm not far left. Yes, far left. He playwright, and what he did on Monday for the whole week is hang around in the Peacock Theatre every morning to actually write his play. But then he would then also encourage other writers if they needed support and whatever. Now Owen is in his mid-50s, and Owen is a Belfast writer, and he wrote a play called Quietly. And Quietly was a play that's going to come to New York next year, but it has gone on tour, was in Edinburgh, was in London and Dublin, and went to Belfast. Now, I'll tell you the story of Quietly because it kind of began as a very slow burn, and by the time we brought it to Belfast, you could hear the audible crying and the audible emotion in the city. And this will explain to you sometimes the power of an artist, and I'm talking about in just reflecting what's happening. So this play was set at a bar, and this actor, this character, was waiting for another character to come in, and both characters were the same age. This man, his father was blown up by a bomb in the bar, and we discover as the play goes on that the other guy was the guy who threw the bomb into the bar. Now, it's based on a true story, but it's not a documentary play. It's fiction. And what we watched for about an hour as they were drinking pints with a Polish barman behind. Okay, so the Polish barman was the witness. And again, the Polish characters are appearing in New Irish plays more and more. Shibari and Quietly a little bit. And you suddenly realise that what playwrights are doing is noticing that there's an otherness or somebody else in the room. And of course, that's what's happening in Ireland. We are welcoming immigrants, and those immigrants now are not at the moment writing those plays because they're trying to survive. But the immigrants are appearing as characters in people's plays. Paul Mercer's Homeland in 2006, Gary Duggan's Shibari, and Owen McCarthy's Quiet. So as the Polish barman is pulling pints with them, he's standing back and listening, and he's listening to these two people talking, all right? And the anger, of course, because we know that one of the characters killed the other character's father, and you slowly but surely realise that what we're witnessing is peace and reconciliation, right? With no politician in the room, with no media in the room, that these silent, quiet moments have to occur. And have to occur and have to take time. And it's an extraordinary thing, and then a gesture occurs towards the end. And the guy in the leather jacket comes over to the other guy, and you think they're going to hit each other, and the guy just puts out his hand and looks to shake his hand. And and for extraordinary, suddenly you realise that how powerful a thing shaking somebody's hand can be in a very heightened moment. And they do shake hands. And there was an audible gasp in Belfast. There was a sense of, and what we realised, of course, is we've got a long way to go. What's happening in the north? The kind of peace process is become, I suppose, a bit more sectarian and that the peace walls are being built more and more. But moments like this are moments, I think, that the artist and playwright have given us as a huge kind of sense of responsibility to ourselves as what we might try and achieve over the next couple of years. In the meantime, when the play finishes, the Polish barman, the whole thing was set in the backdrop of a football game, a soccer game. And what happens is, of course, that's what's happening in certain cities in Ireland, is that there's an instance of racism occurring. And what happens towards the end is that there are thugs waiting to see if this Polish barman is going to leave, or will leave the bar and see what happens. And there's a sense the play ends that as one peace and reconciliation is happening, that history is repeating itself. Extraordinary. This play lasted 70 minutes and is one of the most profound plays I've ever produced, and it has an extraordinary impact on. And it's something that we know. We had a lot of victims of the violence who saw it in Belfast. It packed in Belfast. It didn't pack in Dublin, which is interesting. And I think it was our responsibility in the Abbey to say, look, the issue isn't over. We in the South have still a responsibility to make sure that just because nobody's killing themselves, so when we hear about the flags issue or we hear about something happening in the North, we have to remind ourselves that we're literally only a step away from perhaps violence reoccurring. And this play had a huge and profound impact on all of us. Another writer, Richard Dormer, wrote this play, again a Northern writer, and I suppose a lot of the writers, we're spending a lot of time working with Northern writers. Richard Dormer, again, is a very well-known actor, and he wrote a sort of play called Drum Belly, which looked at, for all intents and purposes, situated in New York on the weekend of the moon landing, and it was about the moment where the Irish mafia lost control of the city and the Italians took over. Okay, but what he was really talking about perhaps was that moment when paramilitarism or illegality becomes legal, and the challenge facing the paramilitaries in the north. You know, how do you transition into? And again, you didn't need to know this. The play was a fantastic play. It's called Drum Belly, but there was, of course, Richard Dormer was talking about the current. And any play, any contemporary plays, of course. It doesn't have to be set today, but of course it does allude to some of the themes today. So here's some of the younger writers: Nancy Harris, Fiona McMahon, a whole bunch of writers there who we admire, who were working with us, who started working with us. So these are the writers that, if we hadn't done all the investment of work we did in 2006, 2007, we hadn't given them the short play commissions, we hadn't developed them, they wouldn't be writing now. Most of them we're about to produce. David Iron, fascinating writer, again, from a different tradition in the north. We will be producing his play next year, and as you can see, a lot more women writers are coming to the fore. And these are some of the young writers that have written their first play for us, are writing their second play for us, and we're continuing to produce them. And this is so, it took me, one of the, I suppose, criticism that might be leveled at me and could be leveled at a football manager. Look, where's the results? You're in the job a year, but the results are now. The fact what our legacy is that these writers now continue to be the mainstay, the backbone of writing of the next decade. And we made history. In 2010, these four writers, Nancy Harris, Stacey Gray, Maria Carr, and Cameron Winters, I think it's Cameron must play that, Cameron here. We, for the first time in the history of the Abbey, and also the first time in Irish theatre history, we produced 4 plays by women in a row in one time. That's something we're very And that's No Romance by Nancy Harris, we just mentioned. And the interesting thing is, the second theme that came out, particularly women plays, okay? Plays by women. Is technology. How technology is used or mediated in terms of their daily lives. And all those 3 writers, Cameron Winters, Stacey Gray, and Nancy Harris, technology was an issue or a theme, whether it's internet dating, whether it's IVF treatment, whether it's surveillance. So what we're finding is the female writers, we're looking at technology as how it's mediated through their daily lives, how it both kind of challenges them, how has issues or resolved, and so all three, for me, if I was to get a learning, is that actually, of course, we all know technology is power of our lives, but actually in different ways, those writers beautifully observed that and highlighted that. So just quick stats. We commissioned 76 full-time plays, full-length plays, 25 short plays, 101. Of the ones we've produced, 24, 5 were non-commissioned, which are writers that came to us with their play. We didn't actually commission them, so total 29. Plays yet to be produced, 7. We have 12 currently in development and 5 not completed. So we work all the time, you know. So the role of the Abbey, when we think about it, there's 3 pillars about reflecting and engaging Irish society. One is we do the classic Irish play, the Irish repertoire, and we try and challenge that, do that differently. And I'll speak a minute about Clown and Stars. We pick the classic plays, and my job as director of the Abbey Theatre is to see how rigorous that play is. Is there a different reading? Should I give it to a different younger artist to try and tackle? Is there something new that we can find in that play? And Clown and Stars, I'll speak about that. Another pillar is we look at international work. We look at the work of Shakespeare, look at the Greeks, we look at Ibsen, we look at Chekhov, and then the third, of course, is a new play. So I have 2 theatres, at the Abbey stage, which is a 500-seater, and at the Peacock stage, which is 157 seats. And we produce about 13 to 14 plays a year, constantly, all year round. And we also work with the best and the most interesting of the independent theatre sector. And if they've got good plays on, we invite them in, and we quite regularly do that as well. 2010, when in the middle of the crisis, I did something quite radical. I brought an economist in and asked him to do a show, and we put him on and it sold out. And it was Dave McWilliams, and again, there was a lot of anger at the time and as to why and what was happening in terms of the economy. And I felt that it was important for the National Theatre to actually engage with the economic arguments and the economic standards. David McWilliams did a play called Outsiders for us. It wasn't a play, it was a performance. And we ran it for 3 weeks at the Peacock, and then with such demand that we went on tour across the whole of Ireland. I remember the winter months of that year with snow falling and packed houses all across Ireland. So this is again it's not about a new play, but the idea that the Abbey was engaging with what's happening at the time. No Escape was based on Mary Rafferty wrote based on the Ryan Report, which looked at sex abuse in institutions across Ireland, and it was extraordinary. We did this play for the survivors as well, and we brought it back a few times. Of course, we did the musical. We did our first ever musical called Alice in Wonderland. I always started for them in quite a long time with Philly McMahon and Ray Scown. Again, our connection with younger writers. Philly McMahon worked with us on a short play commission, but also came out from a different culture. Came out of the kind of the pop culture, the kind of club culture, the drag culture of Dublin. A younger, more confident, more expressive community we've had, and we had great success with this musical. And Sarah Green, who you've seen the Blue Day Chaos Fund, and she was recently was nominated for a Tony for her part in the Crippin' Mishman and Water recently as well. So Clown and Stars is another interesting play, extraordinary play, which we'll do in 2016. And what Clown and Stars, what we tried to do with Clown and Stars, and I gave it to a young director called Wayne Jordan. And Wayne was the first director who had no folk memory of 1916. Okay? So, as we're all getting older, what does 1916 mean to that younger generation? So I asked Wayne Jordan, who had no experience, he was 27, no experience of 1916, or couldn't remember in the way I could remember my grandparents talking about 1916. So I wanted him to explore this play. And this play was a highly critical play of 1916. Sean Casey wrote this 10 years, he wrote in 1926. In fact, just a small personal interjection here is that my grandfather was the first person to bring Sean Casey to the Abbey to see a play there before he wrote it in the play. So I have a connection there. And then my great-grandfather, and my grandfather designed the set for the Silver Tassel and did the Irish Fair Made the Abbey. So that's those are connections there. But I asked Wayne Jordan to tackle this play. And this is an extraordinary young, vibrant director who would never have considered directing this. And I just get you to, I played some of what he said, how he approached it, because I think it's a good opportunity to hear a different generation talking and the different challenges of, and this is just a bit of an audio on a presentation he gave to the Abbey in January this year.
I directed the Pound of the Stars on this stage in 2010, and again up the road in the Belvedere Theatre for the Abbey, but in the Belvedere Theatre, and on a tour in the UK and around the country. When I returned to rework my production in 2012, I wrote in the programme the following. This is a play that has haunted the Irish canon for nearly a century, and we turn to it now at a moment of great change as Ireland finds itself again at the end of one story, but also at the inevitable beginning of another. I've had a complicated personal relationship with the Pound of the Stars, and particularly with my production of the Pound of the Stars, since I first directed it. It was the first play that was offered to me that I took on. What I mean by that is that in the case of every other play or theatre piece that I had directed previously, the impetus to create the work or to interpret a particular script had come from me, or I had pursued that project. I was extraordinarily excited and honoured when Fiach McNeill, the artistic director of the Abbey, asked me to take it on. I knew it well, and I loved it for its language, its characters, its humanity, and particularly for its women. But it meant putting myself at the coalface of the national canon and on the national stage. And even that sentence is exhausting. This was something I had studiously avoided throughout my work in the theatre. Ireland as a subject, the actual organisation of the society I actually live in. Whilst my work to that point had been always with other Irish or Dublin-based artists created from our own particular and local viewpoints, we were working as citizens of the world, the Western world at least, or of the just world still to come. Soldiers of poetry for whom the forms of theatre and drama were political, activated enough to fulfil our requirement, or to accommodate us in hiding away from the world, probably both. Directing Plough meant taking the more banal realities of where I was, where I came from, and where we were going out of my peripheral vision and placing it front and centre. I was petrified of the historical and political action in the play, as I have always felt alienated from the myths and heritage of the Irish story. As a young boy whose behaviours were not considered normal for his gender, to the degree that even to his 4- and 5-year-old eye, they notably struck fear and then anger or disdain on the faces of the adults around him. I had never seen much of a place for myself in the story that had led to the anxious society that I found myself in. I remember distinctly staring in my bathroom mirror at a very young age, challenging the overlords in a fairer world that I imagined to be on the other side, to come and take me away from this topsy-turvy, unjust, backward version of life that I found myself in. The invitation that I received from the Abbey was one that meant that whatever else I would be doing as an artist on the project, I would have to deal with being Irish, and what my responsibilities are as an Irish artist, and that costs something, and it still does. It's impossible to separate out my work on The Plough and the Stars from the play I directed just months before, Thomas Kilroy's brilliant and devastating Christ Delivers. Christ Delivers was a new version of Frank Wedekind's Spring Awakening, set in 50s Ireland, a play about the oppression and repression of sexuality and ideas in the relatively new Republic. As the rest of Europe emerged from the Second World War, a measly-minded, brutal and fearful Catholic-coloured order had tightened its suffocating grip during the Irish emergency. It was a job I actively pursued. Sexuality and ignorance in Irish life was something I felt confident to work with and resourced to be creative around. The Ryan report was released just months before we began rehearsal. The scale of institutional abuse and state negligence over a history of many decades was utterly apparent. The Celtic Tiger was over. The economy had crashed, our leaders had failed us.
So, that's a part of my job too. To unlock a play, a classic play, by creating collisions and allowing a different artist. And what he discovered, to the great joy of record-breaking box office, was that Sean O'Casey wrote extraordinary parts for women, and that women were marginalised at the foundation of the state. Sean O'Casey knew that. And the powerful performance of Plough and the Stars was about that extraordinary strength that women had and the extraordinary role. And that's one of the things that Wayne Jordan, as a young theatre artist, rediscovered for a different generation of artists. And that's the part of my job that I love. So finally, and I'm open to questions, I'll show you one last clip, which is the latest play we have on the moment. And it's called The Wasteground Party. It's by Sean Dunn, and Sean is 25 years of age. And Sean was a graduate of our new playwrights program, which I just mentioned, one of the strategies we had. And Sean lives less than a half a mile away from the Abbey Theatre in Portland. And same as Sean Casey lived only up in Dorset Street, half a mile away, in a different part, a different generation, and a different time. And Sean wrote a play which is beautiful and still on, and it's doing very well, got great reviews. Very delicate, evocative play. It's only his third ever play, his first play for the Abbey. And a gently political play about the challenges facing community, challenges facing an estate, and he wrote about bin tax. He wrote the idea of, and anybody who lives in Ireland knows that we've just introduced waste charges, and the idea that you have to pay, put your bins out, your refuse, your waste, your garbage, and we know in streets, particularly in the austere times, that more and more plastic bags are left on the side of the road because people can't afford to pay the garbage tag. And he wrote a beautiful play. You can see all the plastic bags on the other side. And again, the play is not about bin tags, but of course it's a metaphor, it's there. And it took a young writer like Sean Dunn to kind of just alert us that that actually is causing tension in certain parts and certain communities. And I'll just play a very short video of why he wrote this play, and I ended on the note that we continue to support these writers, and Sean Dunn is the next one on the line.
I wanted to write something that people from my community, from my area, that they would want to go see, and something that they'd enjoy. So I was kind of interested in writing a play that was set in an estate in Dublin, and that's kind of where I started it off from. So we just started writing as part of the programme here. That took around 18 months, and from there then we kind of decided that they'd like to do it. So the play revolves around this boy called Gary, who was taking a break from college. So he's back home with his mum, and he's kind of hanging around the estate a lot, and he's kind of deliberating in himself whether or not to go back to his course. His mother really wants him to, but he's not too sure in himself. Alongside that, there's an event happening within the estate, within the community around him, that revolves around a playground being opened on an old waste ground. So some of the residents are coming together to kind of celebrate that moment, and they're trying to organise a street party for the kids and stuff like that. But while that's happening as well, a lot of dumping is occurring, so people are dumping their bags, their rubbish. The play is kind of trying to explore our relationship to actions like that, and what it says about ourselves and the respect that we have for the areas that we live in. It's a really great time for me, really, because I suppose once you're writing the play, you're working a lot on your own, and it can be quite solitary. You'll be meeting with the with the literary department every couple of months to kind of assess the situation and talk about it. But now it's nice because it's kind of all hands on deck. Jerry Stanbridge is directing it. There's a great cast, and there's kind of a lot of cool stuff happening within the Abbey in terms of organising the marketing material, stuff like that. So we're really just preparing, I suppose, to share the show with everybody. So the new playwrights programme was a programme for new writers that the Abbey ran last year, that I was on with 5 other writers. And what we kind of did was there were seminars where we would meet other artists, directors, writers, we'd kind of talk about the theatre landscape in Ireland and what it is to be a playwright today. And while we were doing that, we were always working on our own plays. So, for example, I was working on the Waste Ground Party during that period. So we'd be meeting with Aideen and Brian and kind of discussing the play and having a dramaturgical conversation with the Abbey, while also getting to know other artists and the community as a whole.
Thank you.
Open it up to questions. People ask questions, and Fiach said he would take questions of any nature. So we can, if people have questions, I'll give you a second to think about it.